brand new policy change, and maybe the most significant policy change in college athletics in 50 or 60 years. So it's not surprising that it's gone a little bit herky-jerky, but by and large, it's working. It's difficult to say because there really is no data. We can't sit here, even those like you or me or others who are in this business, 40 hours a week. We really don't know what's happening at a lot of institutions, because in some cases there are disclosure requirements. Nobody's forcing students to really disclose them. There's no penalties for not disclosing. The states aren't really enforcing necessarily their laws. So we really don't have enough data to say, hey, this has been great for football players, but not so great for women track athletes. Or this has been great for women's soccer, but gosh, men's soccer doesn't seem to be enjoying many benefits from NIL. So I think that's really the biggest challenge. It's sort of like launching a new marketplace, but nobody's keeping track of any of the data. And ultimately, I think people that are engaged in the industry on a commercial basis, I think the schools themselves, certainly the student athletes, agents, right, brand reps that are involved, everybody would like to see a comprehensive database established where people could say, oh, this is working pretty well, or this is not working. We can tweak this and make it a little bit better. I think personally that's the single biggest deficit up to this point. The NCAA should be collecting the data. They're the governing body for intercollegiate athletics. They decided not to. As part of the Alston decision, they got a little bit terrified, right, for additional lawsuits. So I think without having the data in today's day and age, it's very difficult to say this has been a success, or it's still got plenty of growth space, et cetera. The other thing that needs to happen and will, I think, happen just organically is additional education for all the student athletes. A lot of kids still don't quite know, what can I do? What can I not do? How much time is this really going to take me? I'm busy already doing my sport and going to school. Do I really have time to chase, $100 social media post or whatever, a pizza parlor autograph signing? So I think there still needs to get more experience in terms of the students and how they can handle this, and what's burdensome and what can they legitimately do, and how much can they maybe push off until the summer when they might have a little bit more time. So it's still a young marketplace. That's, I think, the bottom line. But the key for me, ideally, would be to have some sort of relatively comprehensive database where people can say, oh, that's what an autograph at the local pizza parlor for a D1 football player is worth, or that's what a car dealer is going to want from a kid, right? To give him a free car for 6 months, he has to do X, Y, and Z. We just don't have that data. It's only on an anecdotal basis, and it's always dangerous to try to extrapolate from a number of anecdotal cases.
A lot of cars out there, a lot of cars for athletes. That's been the biggest thing we've seen, is a lot of cars for athletes. So I guess sense, yeah, it makes sense. It's easy. Last question here. This kind of ties into what you just said. Is you mentioned the market's not sophisticated enough. There needs to be more data. Education would be great as well. I guess my question is, to end on it, is how long will it take to be a sophisticated market? So if it's 2 years or 3 years from now, is it that short a window to say, hey, the market's sophisticated enough, schools can be prepared to handle a lot of this on their own, maybe not everything on their own, but a lot on their own? Is that 2 or 3 years away, or do you think there'll always be a need for more data, more information? Are we much further away from saying, hey, NIL has figured it out, right? Early on, compliance, I'm sure, took a lot of time and effort and outside advisors and education for athletes, and then that kind of got understood. Are we 2 or 3 years away from the NIL market being understood by all parties, or could it be a lot longer than that?
Well, assuming that there begins to, that the NCAA begins to sort of formulate some policies and a little bit more guidance, and that's how the system works, right? The NCAA usually provides guidance for this or that issue, and schools then respond. But assuming that there's some pretty substantive guidance over the next 6 to 12 months, I think that we'll see a marketplace 3 or 4 years from now that is much more mature. It'll grow. It'll be like a dog. It'll grow very quickly, into a mature entity, and that's when I think a lot of the national brands, they may stay in the sidelines for a little bit, because they're also investing in a certain player who all of a sudden may not be the starter anymore. Like the kid's on the bench, and that's not what a brand wants. They may say, we're going to hold off and wait a little bit until this market grows up a little bit. But assuming that there is some guidance from the NCAA, I think it's probably a 2 or 3 year period before there's a lot of maturity in the market, and people have a pretty good idea of what they can do. And they'll, I think student athletes will find sort of a repetitive thing. There'll be a particular car dealer, and at University X who's willing to do 2 deals every year for a student athlete, and kids are going to kind of fight to get those deals, right? So I think you'll begin to see that some trends begin to develop.
And I guess, sorry, I lied. One more question, Oliver, because you kind of hit on something there. Is we started this off saying what can basketball athletes and other sports coming up here in the winter and the spring. Obviously, one topic in the football space for especially major sponsors is, did we make mistakes in going with players like Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma, who's been benched and now back in the lineup, and Clemson's quarterback also not playing as well? Was he worth a huge sponsorship deal? And it's all still to be determined. But do you see any marketplace kind of correction to say, hey, maybe we don't invest as major brands into top college athletes for a little while? Or do you think brands probably weren't scared off, and maybe there still is excitement for the top players at every sport?
Well, there's always going to be a handful of sort of national figures, right, in college athletics, but not many, right? And they're going to change relatively quickly just because of the nature of college athletics. So it's my belief that the bigger brands, they know they can bet on LeBron James to perform week in, week out, even if he gets a little bit older. They can bet on Pat Mahomes or whomever, right? Those are consistent icons, right, in the sports world. And I think it's a little bit different in college. So I think the bigger brands are going to be very prudent and sort of safe, and maybe dip their toe in here or there, but be smart. You can always count on the university's brand, right? The Block S at Stanford, or the Block M at Michigan, or whatever at Ohio State. So those are the safer plays. And if you're a brand X, your first responsibility is do no harm. And, so you don't want to take a chance maybe on a college athlete who all of a sudden, could enter the portal, could be, on the bench, as you say. And there's already been a couple of cases, like that. So you can also bet on a couple of kids coming up. So, but I think the brands are going to relax, stay in the sidelines a little bit, probably focus more on the sure thing. And the sure thing is the professional athlete who has learned how to consistently perform and create that sort of connection with the brand. So that's why I think this realization is beginning to seep in. Man, this is all local. It's hyper local. Might be a couple of national deals, but it's the local marketplaces where student athletes will be drawing those dollars.
Well, you just mentioned it was more of a bet. I think it's a lot more of a gamble right now in the NIL space for especially major athletes than it is a sure thing. But Oliver, I appreciate the time, and it was great to talk to you today about a lot of the NIL news. I appreciate the time you kind of gave us, and I'll turn it back over to Jacqueline at Optimum Sports Consulting as well. But thank you, Oliver. I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your insight, Oliver and Eric. We will now begin part 2 of the panel with Khalil, AT, Austin, and moderated by Emily.
Great, thank you, Jacqueline. So Khalil, 18, Austin, thank you for being with us today. We're looking forward to what you have to bring to this panel. So that being said, let's dive right in. So each of you work in the NIL space, but in different capacities, and you work with different the different interested groups, that being student athletes, administrators, agents, and even businesses, the ones trying to make these deals with student athletes. So can each of you just tell us a little bit about your team and how your company fits into the NIL space? Khalil, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. Perfect. So my name is Khalil Wilkes, Director of Compliance for Mogul. We're the most compliant and secure marketplace in the NIL space. We have 13 full-time employees, but we also have some ambassadors throughout the country. I'm located in the Bay Area, but we have some individuals in Columbus, Ohio, Raleigh, North Carolina, as well as New York and Florida. So we're well spread out. We're founded by athletes for athletes. I played football at Stanford, once protecting Mr. Luck's son. And we also have our Chief Athletic Officer, Brandon Winbush, former Notre Dame quarterback. And we provide a platform that allows businesses as well as student athletes to sign up for free, absolutely free of charge to them. Businesses are allowed to post their opportunities, and students are allowed to apply and be hired through our platform as well. All in one process, not exactly agents, but more so a resource for our universities, students, as well as businesses.
Great, thank you, Khalil. So follow up with that. How does Mogul then reach out to those student athletes? Do you guys partner with schools, conferences? How do you get them to come to your platform?
Yeah, so we reach out to them directly and routinely. We reach out. We have our chief athletic officer, Brandon, that will often reach out to student athletes because he can build that rapport, being a former big-time student athlete himself. As well as myself, my background working in compliance at Stanford Villanova. They also use me to have university relations and to communicate with universities. Like I said before, we understand that compliance offices have their own jobs in ensuring their student athletes eligibility, but we want to be a resource for them. And that's when I come in to at least be able to communicate that to them and kind of introduce our platform.
Great, thank you. AT, can you tell us about Excel and how that fits into this NIL space, more on the athlete representation side?
Yeah, for sure. Good to be here. I'm AT. I'm the NIL legal coordinator at Excel. I mean, we have done representation in professional sports for a long time. We're also built out in other divisions, properties, brand marketing, sales across the industry as a whole. As NIL came to fruition, I mean, it was a natural transition for not only us, but every major agency to start entering that space as well. And we've been involved from directly signing NIL clients to also working in brand marketing with major brands and helping them execute their NIL marketing campaigns. And I'm sure both sides of that are going to continue and are going to continue to escalate. Great,
thank you. So, this is a new space for college athletes. Most of them, well, probably majority of them, all of them, have never had a professional representation before. So do they come to you? Do you target athletes? Like, when do you see the need for legal representation for college athletes now?
Yeah, to that first part, I mean, recruiting is recruiting from the agency side, right? Like when there's a client that we think holds NIL value, then the agents are going to be the one that go out and recruit. And we have a specific NIL agent that goes and does that, makes the recruiting pitch, showcases what we've done in the NIL space, what brands we think they can partner with, and how we can help guide them from a financial perspective, a legal perspective, a compliance perspective throughout the whole process. As far as obtaining legal counsel, I mean, I work on the legal team. I'm not directly a part of the redlining back and forth on legal terms with these contracts, but what I do is build relationships with compliance offices, create one sheets for the agents so they know exactly what process to follow throughout, and then draft and redline representation agreements with these college athletes. And every state has different policies, the states that have laws, and specifically school by school with the disclosure procedures, full representation disclosure procedures for marketing, whether they use open doors, influencer, if they're still running through Teamworks or ARMS. The whole compliance process is the process I guide. And I would say to any high level athlete that is going to sign a major deal, getting legal representation is highly important. You don't want to give up your NIL in perpetuity. You don't want to give up rights that you don't even know you're giving up. So I think at all points, having someone review the contract you're signing is highly important, because this space is new and you're dealing with 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, and there's going to be bad actors in the marketplace trying to sign these kids for deals. So I think it's exceedingly important to have someone you trust to work in your best interest and get you the best deal and the best value that you can get.
Great. Thank you for that insight on the agency side of things. And then Austin, Optimum Sports is pretty much a one-stop shop for all NIL needs for anybody in the market. So can you just talk a little bit about the kinds of people and the type of resources that Optimum hopes to put out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, Khalil and AT, thanks so much for coming on this panel, our first NIL webinar as a company. So Optimum Sports Consulting does several things. The main one, of course, is our newsletters. We have both paid subscribers and free subscribers. Paid subscribers get access to our Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday newsletters, whereas our free subscribers get access to a portion of